welcome to episode 292 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Ash Baker,
Andrew Swafford,
and Dylan Moore.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be talking about a movie that is in no way socially relevant to today's happenings, and that is 1995 Safe, as part of our Patreon picks. This is a pick by Chad Newsom. Again, no relevance to current situations that we're in. Anyway,
it was a pick that was made long before the current situation.
Actually, I think it was made with the intention to do this. I think Chad is behind the coronavirus.
What? Wow.
Listener mail.
I don't know if it's worth it, Chad.
No, I'm putting this on Chad. He's got nothing else to do. His school's out, is all online for the rest of the spring. This is what he can deal with.
That seems like his own problem.
Well, he also created the coronavirus, so we had to watch this movie. Yeah. So there's a lot of problems he's dealing with.
Man, I can't believe we're dedicating a podcast to the person who created the coronavirus.
Hey, hashtag get that clout, baby.
He pays us.
He does pay us, yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, there we go.
It's all about the money.
Ash, I'm going to kick it off with you. You had a movie you want to talk about.
Yeah, so for the first time, I watched Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy, which was a surprise, to say the least. I really didn't know what to expect with this movie. I just, heard it was good and put it on. And man, was it...
Hey, I like comedy.
It was...
I could use a pick-me-up.
It was fucking wild. This movie was crazy. And I loved it. I think one of the things that I admire about Scorsese as a director and is that, he has this sort of thing where he makes these like really tough movies like Goodfellas and Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, and it's like these like testosterone movies. It's like, whoa, like guys being dudes. But then he can also make a movie like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and like After Hours, and I feel like this would be in that category of just like weirder Scorsese. It's like not that that like The Departed, like just like man movie Scorsese. And I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, it's funny you say that. I think that you could also make the case that The King of Comedy is like almost exactly Taxi Driver.
You could make that case. I think it's different. I mean, obviously it's different, but you could make the case that it has like the same shape as Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
But and I wouldn't disagree with you. But I think it's different in that, not only do you have like Richard Pupkin? What's his first name?
Rupert
Pupkin. I was like, man, you get his name like a trillion times and I can't even remember it.
Dick Pupkin.
Yeah. You get like
Dylan.
Rupert Pupkin, who's like this absolute like maniac, like egotist, and like you watch it, and I was watching it with a friend who I've been quarantined with, and my friend says about 10 minutes into the movie, "Oh my God, he's Trump." And I was like, shit. I was like, shit, I didn't think of it until you just said that.
Well, he's Trump without inherited wealth.
Yeah, completely. And with a completely different goal, obviously, which is I want to be...
But also the same goal of like, I just want everyone to be obsessed with me.
Right.
I want everyone to think I'm the best.
Yeah. And so, but you also have the sort of like sidekick maniac girl character who is wildly interesting to me. There's like those scenes where you get that like very shoot the fuck what's the Kubrick movie with the candles.
Barry Lyndon.
Barry Lyndon. You get that.
Hold on, pause.
I'm glad I got you for the alley-oop.
Thank you, Andrew.
And that's the Kubrick movie with the candles?
Yeah.
I mean, name another Kubrick movie with candles.
Yeah, name another
Eyes
Kubrick.
Wide Shut.
Okay,
there are
but
candles.
Barry Lyndon has that very
There's candles
famous.
in a lot of things.
Well, Barry Lyndon has that very famous scene that's lit only by candles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, but we get like that very Barry Lyndon scene with her, like there are all those fucking candles, and he's like wrapped in tape in the chair,
Taped up? Yeah.
and she's like being so
oh my God.
wild, and she's like amazing, but she's so wild.
Sandra Bernhardt is very good.
Just absolutely out of this world, and yeah, I think it's probably one of my favorite of Scorsese's. I heard a lot of like, I haven't seen Joker, but I've heard a lot of people talking about how that movie maybe not directly references, but sort of riffs or takes inspiration from King of Comedy. And it actually makes me a lot more interested to watch Joker now, just because like I loved King of Comedy so much.
That's Zach's disapproving. Right. Anytime
I wish
Joker
we could
is
just
mentioned.
live in a world where we could move past, whatever that is. I would like somebody to get on Photoshop and Photoshop the Barry Lyndon poster and just put the one with the candles as the title.
With that font, yeah.
I kind of do too. That really like yes, a very like painterly portrait of Sandra Bernhardt and Jerry Langford in tape. Yeah. Oh my God.
I'm looking for the font.
I need it. Probably
I'm
like
just
one of
saying.
my like favorite like small bits of like show business thing that's going on in King of Comedy is after all the machinations go into play in the back half of the movie, and the producer friend or whatever gets a call from Jerry Langford while he's kidnapped.
Oh my God.
And the first thing that they say is like, "Oh, Miguel, is this you again?" I can't remember that person's name,
It's
but
like
it's like a guy
Marcello
who
or
keeps coming,
something.
calling, and can make a complete impersonation of Jerry Langford, and tries to like I don't know, like get a hold of somebody or talk to Langford himself that there's just this built-in confusion about identity and personality, and built into like technology and representation, and just that small bit to where it's just like, the actual Langford's voice can be replicated and his identity taken in this weird way to where it kind of allows the rest of this to happen. It's a very strange small point.
Very nice. Well, King of Comedy, is it? I don't think is it streaming places.
If you look closely, you can find it.
All right. Well,
How do you
that's
watch
vague and unhelpful.
it? You can find anything.
Yeah.
Also, there is a Cinematary episode about King of Comedy that you can go listen to after you
And
watch
there's
that movie, if you want
there's a
to.
Cinematary episode about Stanley Kubrick's The One with the Candles. You'd like to listen to that as well.
There is. I think we need to go back
Yeah, I
and
gotta go
retroactively
fix
change
that.
the title of that episode.
Yeah. And then we got to call up the guy we talked to, who we interviewed about the movie, and let him know as well.
Right.
So, boom. All right. I'm going to go on to our next one. This is one I caught actually a week and a half ago or so, a while back. But it is Pom Poko from 1994. It is directed by Isao Takahata of Studio Ghibli fame. People are probably more familiar with his films Grave of the Fireflies or The Tales of Princess Kaguya, which I know we we talked about a while back in terms of the best of the decade list. But this is kind of the one. This is the one that they forget about with Takahata, as well as the one that people find out just the base level of what happens in this, which is these raccoons have giant testicles, and that's what we latch on to. Which, fair, I don't dispute. It's hard not to, and they're pretty prominent.
Hard not to latch
but not
on to
as
that.
prominent as you would think, but still prominent enough to warrant mentioning the large testicles that these raccoons have. I want to also mention that they're
they prone
not
to latching?
raccoons. What?
Are they prone to latching onto things?
Oh, they are prone to latching on the things. Let me tell you, there's a lot of fighting in this, and those testicles are utilized. They're not raccoons though, because here in America we're ignorant. We had to translate these this deep Japanese mythology of the tanuki into the raccoons, because that's how we're going to be able to filter this information. But the story takes place in, let's say, like around the time that the movie came out, 94, kind of mid 90s. And it follows this band of tanuki that live in the Tama Hills, which is outside of Tokyo. And this is at a point where Tokyo is starting to expand and create more suburban housing and just life outside of the city. And so the Tama Hills are in trouble because they are in the path of this rapid development of houses and shopping malls and things of that nature. And so the tanuki in the hills decide that they're going to fight back. They're going to all band together rather than fighting each other and fight back against the humans as they start to encroach on their land. And for a movie that includes, for, posterity's sake, raccoons with giant testicles fighting humans, very nuanced view of like urbanization and urban sprawl and gentrification and just the development of land where cities start to kind of expand and engulf the nature around it, which kind of was shocking to me at least, especially this movie compared to a lot of Ghibli films is much more kind of cartoony. There are sequences that seem more like they're from kind of a Looney Tunes cartoon, where there's just this brash absurdity to like the actions that the different characters are taking. There's multiple times during the movie where they have like this large meeting where they're planning like what they should do in order to fight back against the humans, and then like somebody brings food and the entire meeting disbands and all of the little tanuki are just like eating food, and then nothing happens and then they just move on to the next scene, and I'm just like, well, like what's going on here? But I also felt like Takahata is working a lot through a little bit of encroaching on stuff that you're kind of familiar with Studio Ghibli movies, which is you're constantly dealing with kind of this mythological past, this pre-war Japan and its customs and traditions, and how post-war Japan is changing, and you're kind of having a lot of this urban sprawl take over and erode a lot of those cultures and traditions and pasts. And it does it in a way that I found to be much more it's kind of presenting a lot of these ideas, but in a way that's much less opaque than just kind of having the tanuki stand in front of the camera and tell you what's going on. I found it really interesting that he has these moments where like they're trying to plan something and they get distracted by food and everything kind of disbands, and because they have multiple instances of that where they'll like have this attack on the humans and it'll be successful, and they'll start to kind of gain this notoriety where the humans think that they're like these ghosts that are inhabiting the space, because I guess also, and this goes back to the lore of like what the tanuki are, but they have these creatures have the ability to kind of morph into different figures and creatures and mythological beasts and such. And so they spend a lot of their time kind of haunting, for lack of a better word, the humans at the construction sites. And so you'll have these sequences where the Tanuki will come down and they'll haunt the humans, and they'll come back, and it's a wild success because that it'll stop production of the construction for a few days, and they have like this wild party and celebrate it. But then they kind of think that like the job's done, like in this pre-war sense where it's like you have the objective and you go there and you stop it, and then that's it. There's no progression from there, because we're in this kind of modern way of doing things. Even though they stop the humans from this construction build for a little amount of time, eventually, because of just the systems at play, unknown to the Tanuki, the humans will start constructing again, because no matter how many myths and no matter how many haunts and different things you can throw at them, at the end of the day, the money is still driving this, in the initiative to kind of wither away the lands in place is there. And so no matter how many elaborate plans they can come up with, it all kind of goes to rot. And as the movie kind of moves forward, the Tanuki are forced to inhabit them or become one with the human life, where rather than having this kind of sacred mythological portion of land out in the wilderness outside of the city, instead, because the city has kind of encompassed all of their area, they're forced to, part of them are forced to literally morph into kind of a human figure and just live like a human life with like a 9-to-5 job and everything, while others are just kind of sticking as rabid raccoons, living like this freedom amongst the urban sprawl. It's kind of a messy. It's a messy movie. It's way too long. It's like right at 2 hours. It does not need to be that long. But I don't know. I found it really interesting, and I think that this way of speaking to urbanization and gentrification in a way where it's much more subtle, and you're just kind of watching these creatures and these figures take one step forward and think that one step is enough, but unknown to them, they're actually getting pulled 4 steps back, because that's just how the systems at play work. I found that to be kind of interesting and intuitive for a movie with raccoons with giant testicles. So I would recommend Pom Poko. If you're a fan of Studio Ghibli, it's kind of one to go check out. And I think it's also one that gets kind of hidden amongst the much more well-known titles, and is worthy of being out there from this company. So yeah, check it out. I'm going to toss it over to you though, Andrew. You caught a movie for fans of Knives Out. They should check this one out.
Yeah. So the movie I'm going to talk about very briefly is Clue, which I decided to watch because my wife Jessie was specifically asking for a movie that was like, but not necessarily Knives Out. And I was like, well, the Next Picture Show podcast paired it with Clue, and I've heard a lot of great things about Clue from my friends, so let's watch Clue. And it's free on Amazon Prime, and I highly, highly recommend it. This was a delightful quarantine viewing. I mentioned last week that I'm having a hard time deciding on things to watch or actually committing to sit down and watch movies at all. But this definitely held my attention and was a welcome respite in the world right now. Not a whole lot to say about it. It's kind of a campy, tongue-in-cheek murder mystery with a cast of a lot of character actors that you'll know from various places. Christopher Lloyd is in this movie.
Tim Curry?
What Tim Curry is the lead, the butler in this movie. And I think the best thing that I can say to recommend this is just Tim Curry's performance. I saw somebody on Letterboxd today say it's one of the best performances of the 80s period. And I really can't argue with that. It's really over the top. He's doing a lot. Very energetic performance. There's a series of scenes near the end of the movie where Tim Curry is he's rushing around the mansion and dragging everybody with him and reenacting everything that we have seen in the movie up to this point, and just like saying all the things out loud, and he's just giving it his absolute all, and it's hysterical. It's one of those movies of its era, and that era being the 80s, and also I think this was a thing in the 70s as well, where it feels like the script has just been worked through a billion times, so like every single line is a joke or a pun. It reminds me of Airplane in that respect. And yeah, it never really settles into being a serious narrative, because it's not. Like I said, it's a very tongue-in-cheek thing. I'm assuming this is the first time a board game of any sort was adapted for the screen, and kind of like with the Lego movie several years back, I think the creators knew that it was kind of a silly venture in the first place, and so they're kind of imbuing the film with that spirit. The other thing to say about it that I think that most people have heard about the film, if they've heard about it at all, is that when it first played in theaters, it was sent out to theaters with various different endings tacked on to the end. So if you went to one theater, you might get one ending. Go to another theater, you might get a totally different ending. The version that is on Amazon Prime stitches together all three endings, which are increasingly delightful. I think that if I only saw one of them, the only one that would be truly satisfying is the last one, which I won't say anything about. I won't spoil why that's the best ending, but I think that ending is even better after the cumulative effect of the other two endings have already kind of been set up. So I was just really bowled over by it. Really, really delightful movie. Ash, I know you really like this as well. Anything else to say about Clue?
Yeah. I think one of it's been a really long time since I've seen it, but the things that I remember best are Tim Curry just being amazing, and the endings, like the multiple endings. I remember like watching the first ending and I was like, no! And then it's like, wait, but it could have happened this way. And then it goes through the different endings. And I also remember, and I don't, again, remember exactly what happens, but I do remember being very satisfied at the end when the movie finally comes to a close. It's definitely one that I would love to rewatch now, especially having seen Knives Out and enjoying that. Because it reminded me of Clue.
Yeah.
And how much I loved that movie
And
before.
it doesn't have the same kind of allegorical subtext as Knives Out. It's not a movie that has a lot on its mind other than just making the audience laugh. Though there is this weird through line about government corruption and fear of communism being unfounded. Like in all three endings, the one line that is consistent amongst all three is communism was just a red herring, because the characters always keep thinking it's the communists who are behind this horrible plot. But no, all three endings are in agreement that communism not actually as bad as people think. So yeah, it's fun. It's a good movie. It's on Amazon Prime for free. You should go watch it if you are so inclined.
Very cool. Dylan, take us home.
So yeah, in preparation, I guess to just wrap my head around us trying to watch and talk about Safe today for part 2, I ended up going back and watching one of Todd Haynes' earlier short films from the 80s. This one was called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter Story. And I'd never actually found the time or opportunity to watch this one. And it's a real trip. Basically, the premise is telling the story of the Carpenters, particularly Karen Carpenter, a pop group from the late 60s, 70s. And it's all told is kind of like as like a PSA with like a narrator character and text that's kind of trying to specifically explain anorexia, because that was key to at least the arc of the story that it was telling here of Karen Carpenter's life and her dealing with anorexia throughout her life.
And she's the first big public case.
Okay, yeah, I can believe that. And the really sticking point beyond its kind of like PSA documentary style is the fact that it's all shot with Barbie dolls. You know, like every character gets a Barbie or a Ken doll or those kind of equivalent things, and for a good stretch, I can see why it might be hard to like focus and not consider how ridiculous it is. But as it keeps going, as Todd Haynes tells this story, it only actually unsettling starts to feel more and more real and disturbing what he can get out from the dolls and the vocal performances that characters gave, that people gave for the characters. And it's I don't know. I was only able to find this on YouTube. I don't know if there's like a really good way. I think he thought this was lost for a while, and it got like enmeshed in copyright because what is it? Richard Carpenter was like really pissed off at them for making this and getting exposure and like making him look like a bad person, because he was basically just really shaming and accosting his sister, particularly in like intense moments of their performances or right before performances, of like why she can't get it together, what's wrong with her, these kinds of things, and only exacerbating the situation. Like it does make him seem like a dick, and I don't really know much about the story outside of this short film, but if it's anything like this, then it does not make him look good. And I feel like a really strong connection between this and us talking about Safe here in a bit is this kind of focusing on a domestic exposed feminine story in this way. Like so much of this movie, because it's about Karen Carpenter and her dealing with anorexia, is so much about body image. And in this case, because we're working with and watching Barbie dolls, there is a reference and tension that goes with directly showing these things being portrayed with Barbie dolls. And when we talk about Safe and Julianne Moore's performance and what she thinks eventually is wrong with her, if that's even the right way to frame it, it becomes really important at that point to see the whole rest of the frame of all the people, family, things that are around her, putting these kind of pressures onto them as people and characters, and how that seems to negatively impact their situation. So I'm kind of talking around parts of it because it is such a unsettling, surreal experience of watching it. There's this one moment in particular where Karen Carpenter is in the dressing room getting ready, but she is just passed out. And part of this is, she's not eating that much. She's taking laxatives to try to control her weight, and she's just exhausted all the time. And so she's just passed out in the dressing room, and Richard Carpenter comes breaking in saying, "What's the deal, Karen? Why are you asleep? You need to get up. You got 15 minutes to..." And he just starts yelling at her and saying, he's like, "Yeah, you're messing up everything. This is your fault." And the doll just kind of just starts like going up and down, just like looks like it's crying. And it's just this really weird, surreal moment to where this very inanimate object starts to feel very real. And I don't know. At that point, I can't recommend it enough, particularly if you're interested in Todd Haynes' early films.
I know
and if you get anything at a Safe. So
I know the Karen Carpenter estate has been really aggressive about making this movie unavailable to the public. How are you able to watch it?
So again, like I was able to see it on YouTube. There's like other streaming ways to find it. The movie itself is not, it's meant to kind of look like a really grainy video quality. So that is, it probably could be remastered in a way to kind of give it some more clarity, particularly with this black text on background that gets really kind of hard to read, even though it's trying to, talk put out important information, kind of in this PSA style about anorexia, but it kind of is hard to read. But yeah, no, that was the real main thing. It was like, it seems like it got wrapped up in lawsuits, and particularly Richard Carpenter was going after him when it came out. So I would still try to recommend watching it, particularly if after you listen to our Safe conversation, or if you watch Safe for this.
I mean, it would be among my favorite Todd Haynes films.
Yeah,
I don't know if it'd be number 1 or number 2, but I think it's one of the most interesting things he's done. I watched it on YouTube as well several years back. I mean, the things that stuck with me were just the horror of how he uses the Barbie dolls to kind of like carve away at them to show the difficulty of an eating disorder, and also just kind of a recognition on my part of like how good Karen Carpenter's music is.
Yeah.
Like so much of it is really moving, and I had never even thought to listen to her.
It's their music, like I haven't really given it much thought, but I knew it in like this kind of cultural osmosis way where I know I've heard these songs before, whether or not it's, one of those things where they were played on The Simpsons or King of the Hill, kind of one of those like third hand experiencing of someone's music. But yeah, it somehow, because it's portrayed through these dolls and these performances coming out of it, it like, strips away or like, shows it bare in this kind of way that's like really deeply sad considering the rest of the story that's being told around it, right? So I mean, whether or not you just hear the music in this clean, like separated way that the movie's kind of poking at for the Carpenter's image, right? But then they have some talking heads on there to actually give other kinds of context. It's like, no, Karen Carpenter's performance is actually like deeply melancholy and subversive in its own way and of itself. And to your point, Andrew, I think the movie kind of goes a long way to try to tie those things together.
Well, like you said, it is available on YouTube if you'd like to check it out. Let's take a quick break and we'll be back talking Safe in just a minute. So stick with us. Hello, Cinematary. This is Zach, your host, and I'm going to use this midpoint in this week's episode to let you know a little bit about what's happening on both the website and the podcast. So first off, I know for a very long time we asked you not to give us any money. Well, things have changed. We want that money. I'm just kidding. We just want like $5 a month for the rest of your life. But we're doing a Patreon, and I promise this is all in good fun. Patreon.com/Cinematary. I'm sure you've heard us mention it at the end of the episode. We are doing this in order to pay for our writing that is happening on the website. We have a wonderful breadth of writers who are all giving a lot of time and effort to come up with reviews and share their thoughts on the website. And so we wanted to just give back to them in that way. And so that is why we created our Patreon page. So again, for $5 a month, you can get exclusive content from the staff. Right now we have our hit series Film Theory and Chill, which takes a piece of film theory each month and then deconstructs it in a way that makes it a little bit more accessible. And then we end that episode usually with just us rambling about whatever is on our mind at that period of time. It's for some people, I guess. But you can find that on patreon.com/cinematary. Please consider, making that donation each month just to help show these writers your appreciation for what they do. Another easy way to kind of keep up with what's happening on Cinematary is signing up for our free newsletter. So if you missed an episode, if you weren't paying attention to social media and you missed maybe a review or something, or a video essay or something that we posted, this is an easy way to keep up with all of that. So each Sunday we send out a note. It goes straight to your inbox. It gives you the latest podcast episodes, what's happening on the Patreon page, and the last 2 reviews that are on cinematary.com. This is a great way to keep up with what's happening, and it's a nice way if you forget to go, oh, hey, I'm not, just chilling out on a Sunday. I'm having some coffee, doing Sunday things. Here, I'm going to check out what Andrew wrote about something, or what Nathan wrote about something. Just, we got that stuff going. So you can find that on the website, cinematary.com. You can sign up for the newsletter. Again, it's free. And finally, the easiest way to support this show is to go on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a rating and review. You know, this is just how the algorithms work. I know every show asks you to do this, but honestly, if you could take 30 seconds to a minute and do this, it would greatly, help us. I mean, this helps us just as much as, signing up for the Patreon or letting people know on social media that you listen to Cinematary and you enjoy it. All of that stuff is very helpful. So give us a rating and review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to the podcast, and share it on social media. Let people know that Cinematary is around. So again, consider donating to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cinematary. Sign up for the free newsletter and then give us a rating and review on your podcaster app. Well, that is way too much of me talking. You're about to hear more of me talking, so I apologize in advance, but thank you for listening, and let's get back to the show. And we are back with part 2 of episode 292 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be celebrating our patrons with some Patreon picks. They've given us some selections that they would like us to review, and we're going to kick that off with the incredibly socially relevant 1995 film Safe by Todd Haynes. For those of you who have been listening for the last few weeks, yes, we're talking about narrative films again. So just calm down. Don't be a dick about it.
There are characters and stories
and plot
and problems to be solved.
Yeah. So I'm glad you survived.
This is the one.
This is the one.
This is what narrative cinema is.
Written and directed by Todd Haynes, the film stars Julianne Moore, Peter Friedman, Xander Berkeley, Susan Norman, and James LaGrosse. And the film follows an environmental illness sends a California wife to a New Age guru's clinic in New Mexico, which I think is the vaguest way to explain this movie. In a 1995 interview with Filmmaker magazine, Todd Haynes cited films such as Red Desert, Jean Dielman, and 2001: A Space Odyssey as some inspirations for the aesthetic of Safe. He mentioned 2001 again in a 2014 interview with the Film Stage, where he talked about crafting the view of San Fernando Valley, saying, "I remember thinking of the films of Stanley Kubrick in 2001 and trying to infuse suburban life with that weird sense of being in a completely controlled environment, where there's conveyor walkways, carpeted walls, and where nothing feels it's been bruised by human soiling. It's beyond human in a way. You find this fragile subject, Carol, at the center of this alienated life and world, which really does come through. It speaks a lot to that city." Haynes continued on the aesthetic inspiration, saying, "Most overtly, I was thinking of the TV Disease film, but the film language of horror films was also inspirational. I love that moment in Hitchcock when you know something is about to happen, and suspense is created by prolonging the ordinary mundane events that precede this event." Talking about Julianne Moore's performance, he said, "Her courage as an actress was in knowing how little to do to communicate Carol's paralysis. This is something many actors don't understand. Some people can't open their mouths very big, can't move their eyes very far, can't move their necks very far. There are reasons why each of these things is blocked or limited, and that's something for an actor to use. But instead of demonstrating all the blockages and all the limitations, she was so incredibly secure about how to approach it. It was amazing to me." He talked about the continued relevancy of the movie to The Dissolve in 2014, saying, "Certainly everything was being interpreted around the specificity of AIDS and HIV at the time that Safe was made. That was on my mind quite specifically when I was conceiving of the film. At the same time, I wanted to bring up the behavior that we all exhibit around illness, particularly in the way we try to attach meaning and personal responsibility to illness and how much illness and identity are mixed up with each other. Those were definitely motivating interests of mine that I felt were absolutely and totally being played out in the AIDS culture around me at the time. Since then, AIDS has faded as a number one health emergency in this country due to extraordinary developments in treatment and the great fortune of those developments for many people. I still feel like we are a culture that is continually reminded of our vulnerability to contaminants and illness. I'll let that sit. Writing about the film and its main character in 2005, Julie Grossman concluded that the film was a challenge to traditional Hollywood film narratives with the heroine taking charge of her life, adding that Haynes sets Carol up as the victim both of a male-dominated society and also of an equally debilitating self-help culture that encourages patients to take sole responsibility for their illness and recovery. In 1995, the New York Times said, brilliantly, as it begins, Safe eventually succumbs to its own modern malady, as the filmmaker insists on a chilling ambiguity that breeds more detachment than interest. Variety in 1995 said the audaciousness that marked Todd Haynes' earlier work has been supplanted by self-important preachiness in Safe. Highly controlled and precise stylistically, the director's follow-up to his award-winning Unzipped, Poison delves into the ominous condition of environmental illness in an arid, pretentious way that will try the patience of even of viewers who come to it sympathetically. And in 1995, Roger Ebert said, you don't always notice it, but during a lot of the scenes in Safe, there's a low-level hum on the soundtrack. This is not an audio flaw, but a subtle effect. It suggests the malevolent machinery of some sort is always at work somewhere nearby. Air conditioning, perhaps, or electrical motors, or idling engines sending gases and waste products into the air. The effect is to make the movie's environment quietly menacing. On that note, let's talk a little bit about Safe. I know you were a big fan of this, watching it for the first time. So, Ash, I'm going to kick it off with you.
Yeah. I, again, really didn't know what to expect with this one. I'm generally a big Todd Haynes fan, so I was excited to watch it. I'd heard sort of mixed things about this movie. I'd known people who really enjoyed it, and I'd also known people who thought it was really boring and didn't like it. So I didn't have any sort of preconceived notions about it. I was just sort of going in thinking, okay, I'm going to watch a Todd Haynes movie. I'll probably like it, but maybe not. I ended up really enjoying it. I always tend to love Julianne Moore, and this particular character, I don't know, I can't think of. I feel like I've seen a dozen Julianne Moore movies. Maybe I'm overestimating it, but she's in a lot of movies, and I feel like I've never seen her play a character like this before. One that was so self-conscious and just completely submissive, and her voice is so small. It's very like dominated housewife in the 90s. I don't know. Like, it's exactly what I forgot within a second that it was Julianne Moore, and she sort of I don't know, it sort of starts out like a horror movie in a way. It's like she's paranoid because she thinks that something is wrong with her and no one believes her. The doctor says she's fine. The husband thinks she's making stuff up. The husband is like cussing at her for like having a headache.
Yeah. No, the presumption for that scene was like he's mad that they can't have sex because she has a headache every night of the week, and he's being a dick. So
right, but regardless, yeah, he's just like going about this the complete wrong way. But the way that the movie progressed was a complete surprise to me. It just starts so quietly and it continues quietly, but the stuff that happens just gets really weird. It was very satisfying to watch, like, this very quiet movie turn into a still quiet movie that just got like super strange. And yeah, I the way that it sort of shifts into like one, I like what the one review, I forget who wrote it that you just read, Zach, said, you know, she goes from like this one terrible environment to the other in a way, and that's sort of like tragic to watch, but yeah.
Dylan, what about you?
Yeah, just to bounce off that point, it's it so much feels more tragic because when she makes that switch at first, you get this comforting. It's called Rinwood, whatever, like spa, whatever it is.
It's not a state.
Estate, great.
No, is that it? Whatever. It's Renwood though.
Yeah, Rinwood, to where it feels really nice and inviting. But of course, as soon as like she gets there in the cab, she has one of the people staying there just yelling at her to stop the car because it's going to immediately contaminate the area. So it becomes, it's a shock first, but then immediately tries to be welcoming with the people who run it, trying to comfort her, and everybody's doing what seems like their best to make her feel invited to things, and that her experience of the outside world is not so strange, and that she should feel free to let it all hang out there. But as it becomes more and more abundant with the Peter Dunning character, who's like the leader of this space, it feels you get more and more of like his words and pressure and this kind of self-help therapy thing that only pushes the burden on the individual, and it's only your sickness is only emotional, and that you can get through it individually like that. And it becomes more and more tragic as she has to isolate herself more and more, because she's just accepting the things that are going on and trying to figure out the best she can, considering. And so yeah, this is the third time I've seen this, I think, and this time in particular, I just that dread, right? That Ash in that review, just Ebert's review, mention of that, like that low hum, and it just kind of builds and accretes on top of each other, and then it's just like every scene almost just kind of builds on it. Sometimes you get like moments of like reprieve where it's not there, and it's kind of feels fine, and then I don't know, like the goofiness of it all kind of happens. Like this one scene where she was apologizing to her husband the night before, that scene that Ash alluded to, for just everything in general, and they come in for a hug, and it looks like she's sobbing, but that sob, we find out, turns into her vomiting on the floor, and it's just this switch of emotion and gear that, yeah, I laughed. It was like really fucked. It was like, oh right, well, yeah, of course, it's shouldn't be too surprised. She's going through a lot in a lot of different ways right now. So it's just that presumption for us projecting on to that, like she's crying and feels bad, to where it just careens into this other direction. That the fact that the movie can do both of those tones, that I feel like for me just only makes the dread sink in further.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I kind of want to zero in a little bit on Ebert's point and what we just talked about with kind of the soundtrack of Safe, for especially the kind of first and second half, where it's like her kind of discovering her illness and then her kind of trying to combat it while she's still at home in San Fernando Valley. Because yeah, it's like it's perfectly positioned because she's living just outside of LA. It's still very much like a city, and so it's kind of inconspicuous because it just sounds to an extent like just being like in a city. Like you just kind of hear humming and motors and just kind of things emanating sounds that make a city sound like a city, but it does kind of drone in this way that it starts to kind of crawl up your skin, because it like evades that more traditional city sounding noises and becomes something much more like viral. I mean, Andrew, is this something that you noticed like while watching the movie?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the scenes with, I don't know what her relationship to this woman is, but the woman who tries to sell her on the fruit diet.
It's just her friend, Linda.
Her
I
friend,
think.
yeah.
And
She's sitting in a restaurant with her friend, talking about her illness openly for the first time, and that's when I first started to notice the soundscape a lot, because I just the way that Haynes has positioned the camera, the traffic that's going by, they're like sitting on sort of a patio or a deck area on this restaurant, and you can see the traffic, and it's taking up about half the frame. And I started to notice that the noise of the traffic was just about as loud as the dialogue in that scene. And from that point on, I was always kind of noticing the white noise in the background of every scene. This movie also reminds me of the novel White Noise that Ash,
God.
maybe we could talk about that a little bit later, because I know you love that movie. But or that book, yeah,
I love it.
I'm just used to saying movie about every narrative story.
Narrative.
My general take, my general take on Safe is that it's great. It's a masterpiece. It's my favorite Todd Haynes film. It's a movie that I understand that it is slow, and it's using a lot of slow cinema techniques. It's using these one-shot dialogue scenes where the camera is very far away from all the characters, and there's no specific place it's drawing your eye to. The camera or the director's just sort of counting on the audience to follow what's happening. I know there are exceptions to that, of course, but like in a lot of the like party scenes at the beginning, as well as some of the commune scenes at the end, and also there's just so much silence and so much emphasis that's placed on the soundscape and what Carol is not saying and what Carol is not doing, and the very tightly controlled ways in which she's moving her body. I thought it was interesting when you mentioned that Todd Haynes was pulling from Jean Dielman, because I'd not really thought about that connection, but it makes so much sense after hearing this. But this is one of those slow movies that I kind of can't understand not getting really sucked into. One of the quotes you read, Zach, talked about how it generates detachment more than interest, and I don't know, that just the complete opposite happens for me in this movie. There's just a tension that's kind of like holding on the sides of the frame at all times, and the movements that Todd Haynes is doing with his camera are very sparse, very minimal, but always extremely tense when he does them. Like there are these really subtle vertigo shots that happen throughout the film. Like there's one where she just like walks through her living room and starts to feel a sense of unease, and the whole space just sort of warps around her. There's another scene where she's just not feeling very well. It's early in the morning, and she starts drinking a glass of milk. And as she's drinking the milk, the camera is slowly changing its focus.
And it's on her face, right?
It's not like a lot. It's just a little bit
on her. Oh god.
Yes. And then when she stops drinking the milk, that stops, and when she starts drinking it. But like, if you're not paying that much attention, I think that you wouldn't notice anything is happening in the scene whatsoever. But like, if you are paying attention to the way this movie is being put together, the form is telling the story 100% of the time. I also think Julianne Moore's performance is amazing, as you guys have pointed out. I think the movie has a really astute ambivalence about how to feel about her character throughout the whole film. On the one hand, it is kind of begging you to notice her extreme privilege. It's focusing on her kind of ordering around her maid, Fluvia. There's the scene where she orders Fluvia to get her that glass of milk. There's the scene where she goes outside to get fresh air, and she's kind of wandering around her courtyard, and her house is just so enormous. You can't even see the whole thing, and her gardens are so elaborate. And on the one hand, we're supposed to be really wrapped up in this woman's emotional turmoil, but on the other hand, we're kind of noticing her extreme like conspicuous privilege. And you know, Ash, you mentioned that she's kind of a stereotypical oppressed woman, and like in a very specific way, like in the Stepford Wivesy sort of way, where everything appears
like she's
too perfect, like so perfect that she's uncomfortable with it.
She's like ordinary people mom.
Yeah, and you know, to make a connection to another Todd Haynes film, it's like she lives in a dollhouse and she's a Barbie doll. It reminds me of Karen Carpenter a little bit. I mean, there are a lot of different threads I think we can pull on talking about this movie, a lot of ways that you can connect it to different things in Todd Haynes' filmography and a lot of things throughout history and stuff happening right now. But I have a really long list written down of things I want to talk about, and I don't want to dominate the time. So Angel, that's my general take.
Let me bounce off a couple of things that you said. That scene that you're mentioning about her walking around the house and she eventually gets outside to the courtyard. Part of it is like her husband's looking for her, but that scene is particularly disturbing in the way to where, you know, you feel like she's alone in her house, right? Where she can kind of just wander around late at night. But then she gets stopped by a bright light and you see it's
by the cops.
But not only just a cop, but like a cul-de-sac security cop, right? Where it's just like, you know, it's like, hey, are you doing all right, ma'am? And she was just kind of, you know, walking around her own damn house. And you're like, oh, but, I'm not alone.
The fact that that's the line, too, is kind of putting some emphasis on her privilege, too, right? Are you doing okay, ma'am? Assuming that this is this woman's house and she's not just some random straggler who's loitering outside of this person's place.
And so off of that too, I think part of what can be frustrating about this movie and why the ambivalence works in such a disturbing way is that it's hard to like find a single antagonist or a person to blame here. Because, you know, at that case, you know, if it's like a normal kind of horror movie that you know what's causing the horror on some case, or you can feel it in this like visualized way. But in this case, you get all these like
it's so abstracted,
distributed and abstracted kinds of pressures that are put on her, either from her friends is like, hey, no, you should try this fruit diet. No, I'm going to order the fruit diet. And then, you know, because she's feels like she has to conform to the situation, she gets the fruit salad too. And these kinds of things between like her husband being mad at her for not knowing what's going on and the doctor just telling her, it's like, why, you know, I don't really, you look healthy to me. Can you tell me what's been happening? And she can't explain why. She just knows that she feels bad.
Yeah. In this, a fun drinking game would be in the second half of the film, noticing every time they say the word "it" to refer to this like vast abstract problem in the world.
And to that point, Andrew, it becomes particularly concerning in that back half where the guy Peter Dunning or whatever, like this Wynwood leader dude who has a nice fancy house on top of the hill. That he's
cult leader.
He's like, I have to make a confession. I don't read the papers anymore. I don't watch TV. I just, you know, all the bad, negative, toxic things in my life, I just had to get it out. And it's like, you know, the disturbing, alluring part about the whole situation at Wynwood and why it feels comforting at first is like, on one level, you can like, yeah, you know, I probably could cut down on some of the things that are just actively messing with me that I don't feel like I can do anything active about, right? This certain kind of hopelessness that you can have with the 24/7 news. But he takes it to such an extreme and then has this like level of abstracted distance and privilege from being on the house on the hill where it's just like, I mean, I guess he can get away with doing that and it's not that big of a deal. And not only that, but he has an active reinforcement to make that seem okay in his compound thing there. I mean, it's like...
Yeah, because that makes him the last resort of these people. There's no other way, there's no other outlet for their rage or uncertainty or vulnerability. It's just, you know, be safe in this, you know, cozy little womb I've created for you.
Which, thank you for using that word rage. It made me remember so specifically that, you know, it tries to, the language that gets used in Peter Dunning when he's like leading a talk session or whatever, somewhere in the middle, he tries to target so much of like rage and how that gets like projected into self-hatred. But there's this way that like he basically talks down to that woman Mel, who just lost her husband you can imagine why she'd be, you know, rightly pissed about things. And she was saying, she was expressing very clearly homicidal rage of, I would like to shoot everybody that made me like this. And it's not
Oh my God,
a rational, it's not necessarily like a quote unquote rational expression of that rage, but he asked her, like, you know, how she's feeling. And, you know, she's tried to communicate that to him. And then, you know, he immediately retorts, well, you need to drop that, take that gun away and, try to find a calm space or whatever. That becomes the refrain to the situation. And you could just see the look on Mel's face to where it's just like, she's clearly been through a lot of shit. And the woman who plays this character, it's just, she seems kind of done with it, but it all makes it only more tragic, Zach, that you're bringing up that and of where this movie eventually goes to. I don't know if we want to talk to that last moment yet, but
I mean, where did you all land with how the movie kind of ends? Because as you could tell from the reviews from Variety and the New York Times, they did not gel with how this movie ended with the kind of ambiguity.
It makes perfect sense, I think. Structurally, the movie is, we're seeing Carol go to further and further extremes to find answers to her questions and solutions to her problems. But what she effectively does throughout the film, the way the movie is structured, is she's withdrawing further and further into different places of confinement. She first makes herself a little safe room inside her huge manor that she lives in. And then she's like going to these group therapy sessions, and then she goes to the little commune, and then and eventually she's in the safe room in the commune where there's no way that anybody can even see in. And as she's talking to her husband and stepson in the last few scenes of the film, she's always reassuring them like, oh, I'm doing better. But we're also noticing physically she seems to be worse. Like, she has these huge sores on her face. She's stumbling and having these coughing fits whenever she's near her husband.
She looks awful.
And so, like, the cure that she's kind of being sold is just kind of making her increasingly dependent on this one very specific, really a transactional relationship. You don't get the feeling that any of the people who live in this commune are poor. Right there. This is the only thing that you can afford to go to if you have Carol White's money.
Or sadly, to that point, her husband's money, which is a difficult thing because, like, there's a scene earlier on when she was first talking to this very intimidating psychiatrist.
Oh God, yes.
Right? Oh, that fuck it.
And he asks if she works.
Yeah.
And she says no. She says, I'm a house, and then she stops herself. She says, I'm a homemaker. But I've been working on some designs for my house. Yeah, in my free time.
But that switch from like housewife to homemaker is just oh God.
But we of course know that she's not even doing that because of course like Fluvia is doing the actual domestic labor in the house.
Yeah, and like I think one of the things in the ending that stuck out to me is like she hardly speaks for more than a couple sentences the entire movie, besides, like, there's the one scene that Andrew mentioned earlier where she's at lunch with her friend Linda and, like, talking openly about her illness or whatever. And then in the ending scene, when they give her the birthday cake.
Oh, God.
And she's asked to make a speech.
Oh, God. Yep.
Yeah, it's like, it's really, she says the first thing about how, oh, thank you guys so much, I could never have done it without you, and then they all clap. And then she just, like, keeps going, and nothing she says makes any sense. It's like...
And she says earlier that when she's having a one-on-one conversation with Peter Dunning's character, like, she's still trying to find the words.
Yeah.
And then when she's forced on the spot to give a speech as to how she's doing and how grateful she is to all these people. Exactly like you said, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. She just kind of babbles about chemicals and buildings and cars and
reading labels.
And reading labels. And so
going into buildings.
Going into buildings, and at that moment, we can call him a cult leader. the cult leader guy, he's the first person to kind of interrupt her and give a toast, and that seems like the kind, merciful thing to do. But he also has kind of a devious look on his face, like this is the moment where he realizes, I got her.
Oh, God.
She is completely dependent on me at this moment. And we've been very critical of Carol up to this point in the episode, but I mentioned in my opening spiel that I think the movie has a serious ambivalence about her character, because I think it deeply empathizes with her at the same time. Her speech that kind of illustrates that she doesn't have the words for what's wrong with her. I think that's a really relatable moment, honestly, of like feeling like there's something wrong in your life or something wrong with the world, but it's too big, too abstracted, too complicated to really put into that small box of language, that you either just don't talk about it, or you talk about it ungracefully, or you kind of allow yourself to be suckered into some really fake bad solutions for that problem. And I think that... Oh, go ahead.
Just to add to your point, the words that, she does use are just kind of faint echoes of the things that she's heard and has been told about what's going on in her life. And she tries to...
On commercials and ads and things like that.
And she kind of like tries to parrot those back, but then it becomes abundantly clear those don't actually make that much sense to her. It doesn't come clear through to her. So it's like all of that kind of, feel good, individual, personal healing, particularly in there, after you get so many scenes of Peter Dunning just like, oh, this is why, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And, and then she kind of tries to give her like sliver of that in her own words, and she can't do it. And it becomes a thing. It's like, well, I don't know. I guess it's very clear that this is not working if she can't even really like describe to herself or to the people that she's supposed to be in community with about what's going on.
And what's going on, Carol's condition, could be easily dismissed as hypochondria.
Sure.
But
because it's called what? Environmental illness?
Environmental illness, or being allergic to the 20th century. And
Great.
But I think that like throughout Todd Haynes' work, he is very interested in people who are, suffering new problems that we don't necessarily have language or institutional solutions for yet. It's kind of a known fact that this movie functions as an allegory for the AIDS crisis. Which was very recent when the film came out. Superstar, the Karen Carpenter Story, is about the first major case of anorexia that I can imagine in a world where anorexia doesn't exist in the public consciousness, thinking that's just craziness. Like, you're not eating, just eat. It's an easy thing to hand wave away if we don't find language for it and find evidence for it, but it does exist. And then Todd Haynes' most recent film, Dark Waters, I just watched it the other day on Michael's recommendation, and that is a harrowing movie about the ways in which we are kind of being poisoned by the chemicals of the 20th century. The movie ends with it's all about like the harmful to humans. The amount of chemicals found in Teflon that kind of get transmitted into the water supply and into lots of other things that humans consume. And it ends with this title card saying that like nearly every human being on the planet has this chemical inside their body right now because of this one company, DuPont. So, and also like there's a reference in this movie to the Yellow Wallpaper. when she's asked to describe her childhood home, the only thing she can get out before she's interrupted by an ambulance siren is that she remembers her home had yellow wallpaper, which, of course, is a short story about women being prescribed bed rest for all sorts of ailments that just kind of made their conditions worse because scientists, medical practitioners weren't really taking women's health particularly seriously. So, like, I think Todd Haynes wants us to care about Carol's condition and, like, genuinely believes that we have kind of, like, crossed the Rubicon into a new world where so much of what we breathe and eat and drink is kind of being influenced and contaminated by the innovations of the modern world, to put it nicely. And that can be really insidious and scary. Not to even get into any of the COVID-19 stuff and how we're not taking that seriously right now. Or how people in power who should be taking it seriously right now are not taking it seriously right now.
Well, the other thing I was thinking about while watching this is it comes out in 95. It's set in like the late 80s, but it very much has like that kind of Y2K paranoia to it. You know, it feels very like pre-2000. It almost feels like it could have this. It has this kinship with like Heaven's Gate and L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. Like just this unexplainable phenomenon that because you don't have like we've been talking about, like because you don't have the language, you have to latch onto something that at least makes an attempt at providing language. And it seems like this, you know, kind of leaning into like the cult side of where the movie ends up leading, at least the way that Haynes shot it and the way that it kind of just has this distinctly this just really deep 90s feel to, like kind of melancholy sadistic 90s feel to it. It feels very much in line with like those and just Y2K paranoia,
right? And I think, you know, to add on to that, in the late 80s, early 90s, the movie is very interested in how the solutions being offered to these problems to scared, vulnerable people are like self-help books and fad diets and this hippy-dippy new age pseudoscience stuff that ends up being manifest in the cult at the end of the movie. And today, I think that a lot of these specific things have fallen out of fashion, but there are.
I don't know. Have you been seeing the onions on Twitter? People putting the onions in their houses to keep the coronavirus away.
That's what I was gonna say. Like now we're kind of deep in the age of digital conspiratorial misinformation, where like people get hooked on brain pills that they get sold by Alex Jones or something. And then there's all this like grifterism around various social woes. Like you mentioned the onions thing. Also, like there was some commercial that aired on Fox News. Some lady was selling silver, saying like silver will cure anything. You just like rub it on your arms, rub it on your elbows, and it'll get rid of the coronavirus. And there was the thing that Trump tweeted just the other day, like these two random chemicals that he was like all caps yelling at people to put into their bodies because it's going to cure the coronavirus, when no like medical officials have kind of signed off on that. So we're really in like a scary age of where like there aren't these. And I mentioned Alex Jones and I mentioned Donald Trump, but there aren't necessarily like specific hubs of like cult leaders, right? It's just like these like abstract and seemingly endless tendrils of misinformation kind of like going throughout all of the internet and public culture in general. Anyways, we can bring it back to sex if you want.
Any quick final thoughts before we wrap up? Recommendations on this one?
Let's talk about. Can we talk about Lester?
Yes,
for
please,
a second.
Thank you. Right,
Lester, I think is worth talking about. What did you guys make of this character?
Yes. Oh my god.
Oh no.
He's going to be me like week 4 of quarantine.
like how did? Yeah.
He's wearing like a full suit, walking slowly through the woods.
How was that guy describing him? It was like he's afraid to eat he's afraid to breathe, and so he has like that full body mask thing. And we never see him really interact with anybody except being in a far and just walking in this very stilted kind of way, like but
Herky jerky like puppet movements he's doing.
Herky jerky, but like you could tell there's like possibly like a very overcautious like thought behind it, but it just only I'm not really sure what to make other than moving like a puppet is a good way to describe it.
I think it's like I don't know, the movie left me with this weird feeling because I mean, as we were talking about earlier, like Carol, we sympathize with her, but and obviously we know that she's sick. We know something's wrong with her. But because we don't know what's causing it, and because she's responding in this like massively paranoid way and sort of drinking the Kool-Aid of like this, this like terribly misled self-help guy, like we sort of, or at least I sort of was like, Carol, like get yourself together, and so I was sort of left with this weird feeling of like, there's like the whole, well, it's all in your head thing throughout the whole movie. And I don't necessarily think it's all in her head, but at the end I'm like, Carol, like you drinking this Kool-Aid, it certainly isn't helping. You know what I mean? And so it's like,
at least,
exactly. and being in these strange times, sort of, that was sort of the like eerie feeling that I left with, was like what Kool-Aid do we choose to drink or not?
Right. What Kool-Aid do we choose to drink? Do you take the Kool-Aid that tells you to just like withdraw from the world and turn off the news and pretend everything's fine? Do you drink the Kool-Aid that like gets you riled up into blaming some scapegoat on your problems? Or do you drink a Kool-Aid that maybe like channels your fear and your rage into a more productive direction?
Right.
The movie doesn't really give us that as an option, right?
So to your point then, there's a decided switch in Carol's character and her ability to verbalize in that midpoint to when she starts to accept these things and tries to take control, and that way of taking all these pills and learning about all these self-help measures, to where, when she meets Linda again and like says all these things, it's the first time we see her not basically asking a question in one form or another, that she's actually like making a definite statement.
Making a statement.
Yeah. About herself. And her friend is just like, oh, well, I'm glad you were able to find and learn all this knowledge about what's going on. And it's to your point about that Kool-Aid, to where it's what in this case what language you end up using, and how decided it feels in that way for you as a character, and why it makes it so much more tragic to when it doesn't help in that way. There's boy, I lost that one last thought about the end when she says, and in case the mirror is the camera, right? The very last scene where she's looking in, it's just,
well, it's really scary at first because she just turns to us. We don't know there's a mirror on that wall. She
Absolutely.
just looks at us, and she gets up and she slowly walks up to us, and then eventually there's like the mercul reverse shot.
The merciful reverse shot.
She's actually looking in a mirror.
No, there isn't.
It becomes a horror movie for a minute.
Andrew, there's not one, and not only there's not one, it's a reference to, in the middle of the movie, like when she's back at the when she's first being introduced, she has that big talk, the Peter guy, whatever, says things that Claire sees her, this other like administrator for the
and she gives her this pep talk while they're in the cabin together, and
she give that pep talk, and she's like, Carol's emotionally devastated. She's like crying alone by herself. You could isolated, sad, frustrated, all these things. And yes, Carol's trying to be helpful, and she was describing what she did for herself to pick herself up, is look in the mirror and say, I love you. I really, really love you. And, trying to make this affirmation. And the very last shot is a decided reversal of what that looks like for Carol specifically. It's like she's trying to use this same kind of affirmation of language, and it just doesn't come across.
And I mean, it shows us that how far in she is, and she's just parroting things that people have said to her in the past. She's kind of a true believer at this moment. But it's also deeply ironic because, this is something that Carol should be saying to herself internally. She does have no sense of self-worth. She mentions at one point, like, I haven't really liked myself most of my life. And so, like, somebody is offering her this self-esteem, but, like, unfortunately, her vulnerability is kind of being co-opted by some grifter who's just trying to take advantage of her. I also think about people like Jordan Peterson, who is offering that same sense of validation and self-worth to young, angry, confused boys, but not really giving them a like productive channel for that anger or sadness or whatever. It's just like, you need to think of yourself as like this weird warrior king, and it falls into this Jungian archetype of masculinity, which is not really gonna get you anywhere ultimately. And I think Carol's in a similar place at the end of this movie. Like, she's hit a dead end. She's found herself in the igloo inside the rehab center. There's nowhere else to go. But like, this is the only place where she's been told that she has value, and that's scary
and sad. Underlining that point, that cult leader guy says at one point to Mel specifically, the only person who can make you sick is you. And it's just that such a specific fuck you line. That's just what the fuck are you supposed to do with that? Like, okay, thanks.
Awful like personal responsibility worship right there. Yeah.
All right. Well, I believe that will wrap us up on Safe, but we're gonna definitely probably live it for the foreseeable future.
Catch us walking around in our full body suits in the deserts of California.
Coming soon. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, at Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Big thanks to our patrons over on Patreon, patreon.com/Cinematary. We have a new Film Theory and Chill out for those who are just hanging around the house. You got nothing else to do, listen to the Film Theory and Chill. It was a good one. We talked about visual pleasure and narrative cinema, because after the Avant-Garde series, we're really hammering in the narrative cinema to just really thumb our noses at the detractors.
Well, we got some narrative cinema. But
we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, check out. We're going to be talk about visual pleasure and narrative cinema by Laura Mulvey. So check that one out on the Patreon page. Again, patreon.com/Cinematary. Thank you so much to Cam, Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Cindy Roberts, Daniel Gill, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Outfide, Ron Hayes, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Ria Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we're going to get some hardcore narrative cinema with big movie. Andrew, would you like to introduce it?
It's No Mio and Juliet.
Ooh.
The film that my students of various populations have been trying to get me to watch for years now, and I've refused. And then somebody was like, well, I'm gonna pony up the money and make you do it, and they did. So
that's where we're at now.
Here we go.
Because Andrew can't control his students, we're all subjected to an 84-minute movie about gnomes and love.
With a music by Elton John.
Oh, well, shit. You didn't say that. Never mind.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. We'll hopefully survive next week, but definitely check out that. We'll see you then.
What if Safe was the last episode of Cinematary?
And we're over.